I am Elias. I have walked the silent corridors of monasteries, where the stones are worn smooth by the knees of praying men. I have stood in the bare cells of saints, feeling the chill that lingers in the air, a testament to a life stripped of all comfort. And in these quiet, holy places, I have come to understand a truth that our modern world has tried very hard to forget. It is a truth that is both terrifying and beautiful, a paradox that lies at the very heart of faith. We are taught to believe that holiness brings peace, that closeness to God brings light and consolation. We imagine the saints as serene figures, bathed in a perpetual, golden glow, their faces untroubled, their hearts at rest. But this is a fantasy. It is a stained glass lie. The true story of the saints is not a story of comfort. It is a story of fire. It is a story of a love so immense that it is willing to be broken. The great, unsettling mystery is not that the world suffers, but that the saints suffer most of all. Why would a loving God allow his most devoted children, his closest friends, to walk through such profound and relentless darkness? Why are the lives of the holiest men and women so often marked by a degree of pain, desolation, and abandonment that would shatter an ordinary faith? This is the question that haunts the history of the Church. It is a question that takes us beyond easy answers and sentimental piety, into the very heart of the divine mystery. To seek the answer, we must be willing to walk with them into the pain, into the silence, into the long, dark night of the soul. We must be willing to see holiness not as an exemption from suffering, but as a deeper participation in it. The world has a simple relationship with pain. It is an evil to be avoided. Our entire civilization is built around the pursuit of comfort, the elimination of risk, the silencing of all that is unpleasant. We see suffering as a sign of failure, a problem to be solved, a cosmic error. If there is a God, we reason, his job is to make us happy, to protect us from harm, to ensure that our lives are smooth and successful. And so, when we see a person of deep faith, afflicted by terrible illness, consumed by doubt, or abandoned to a profound spiritual emptiness, our own faith is shaken. We ask, where is their God now? Why has he abandoned them? We see it as a contradiction, a failure of the divine promise. But the saints saw it differently. They did not see suffering as an absence of God, but as a different, more terrifying, and ultimately more intimate mode of his presence. They understood that God is not a celestial vending machine, dispensing blessings in exchange for good behavior. He is a consuming fire, and to draw close to that fire is to be willing to be burned. The burn is not a punishment. It is a purification. It is the stripping away of all that is not God, all the illusions, all the self-love, all the spiritual consolations that we mistake for faith itself. It is a journey into a love that is not a feeling, but a reality that can be found even in the heart of the most profound darkness. This is the great secret of the saints. They were not people who were spared from suffering. They were people who learned how to suffer. They learned how to find God not in spite of their pain, but in the very midst of it. They learned that the path to resurrection always leads through the cross. To understand this, we must walk with them. Let us go first to a 16th century Spanish prison cell. It is cold, damp, and utterly dark. The air is foul, the silence broken only by the drip of water and the scuttling of rats. In this hole, a man is kept in solitary confinement for 9 months. He is a Carmelite friar, a poet, a mystic. His name is John of the Cross. His crime? He tried to reform his own religious order, to call it back to a life of prayer and poverty. For this, his own brothers have imprisoned him. They have starved him, beaten him, and subjected him to weekly public floggings. In this place of absolute degradation, abandoned by men, and, it seems, by God himself, John should have been broken. His faith should have shattered. But instead, something else happened. In the depths of that darkness, he began to write. He wrote some of the most beautiful and profound poetry ever composed, poems of a soul in love, a soul searching for its beloved. And he began to formulate a theology that would change the course of Christian spirituality. He called it the dark night of the soul. The dark night, as John described it, is not a crisis of faith. It is a crisis of the senses and the spirit, a stage in the spiritual journey where God seems to disappear. It is a time when the consolations of prayer are withdrawn, the feelings of God's presence, the sweetness of meditation, the intellectual understanding of doctrine. All of it turns to ash. The soul is left in a state of profound emptiness, a spiritual desert. It feels abandoned, rejected, lost. It is a state of almost unbearable pain. The soul cries out, and only silence answers. This, John explained, is not God's punishment. It is his surgery. It is an act of profound love. God is weaning the soul off the spiritual candy of consolations, so that it can learn to love him for himself alone, not for the good feelings he provides. He is purifying the soul's love, burning away the dross of self-interest. He is teaching the soul to walk by pure faith, a faith that does not need to see or feel, a faith that can trust in the goodness of God even when all the evidence seems to point to his absence. The dark night is a crucifixion of the spiritual ego. It is the death of the self-sufficient soul that thinks it can control its relationship with God. It is a surrender to a mystery that is beyond all understanding. John of the Cross, in that filthy prison cell, was not abandoned by God. He was being drawn into the very heart of God, into a union so deep that it required the death of everything he thought he knew about faith. He was learning that the brightest light casts the darkest shadow. The closer one gets to the sun, the more blinding the darkness becomes. His suffering was not a sign of God's displeasure. It was the mark of his intimacy. Now let us travel forward in time to a convent in 19th century France, to a young nun dying of tuberculosis in a cold, damp infirmary. Her name is Thérèse of Lisieux. She is known to the world as the Little Flower, the saint of the little way, a path of spiritual childhood and simple trust. Her writings are filled with images of flowers, of sunshine, of a loving, tender God. But this is only half the story. The last 18 months of her life were a descent into a hell of physical and spiritual suffering. The tuberculosis ravaged her body. She was racked by coughing fits that left her breathless, spitting up blood. Her body was in constant pain, but the physical suffering was nothing compared to the darkness that invaded her soul. The sweet, simple faith that had characterized her life was suddenly and completely extinguished. She was plunged into a trial of faith that she described as a thick, impenetrable fog. The thought of heaven, which had once been her greatest joy, now seemed like a ridiculous fantasy. She wrote, "If you only knew what darkness I am plunged into, I can see nothing. I can believe nothing. I am in a tunnel, and I can see neither the entrance nor the exit." She was tormented by the voices of atheists, the intellectual arguments against the existence of God that she had never before considered. They echoed in her mind, mocking her faith, telling her that her life of sacrifice had been for nothing, that death was just a void, an eternal night. She felt as if God had rejected her, that she was destined for damnation. And yet, in the midst of this absolute darkness, she made a choice. She chose to believe, not with her feelings, not with her intellect, but with the raw, naked will She wrote, "I will not permit myself to be tormented. I will smile at God, even if he hides his face from me." She chose to love, even when she felt no love in return. She offered her suffering for the salvation of unbelievers, for those who lived in the same darkness she was experiencing. But without the anchor of faith, she turned her own desolation into an act of intercession. Thérèse of Lisieux died at the age of 24, her body emaciated, her soul in a storm. Her final words were, "My God, I love you." It was not a cry of triumph, but a cry of pure, naked faith, a faith that had been stripped of everything but love itself. Her suffering was not a contradiction of her holiness. It was its final, perfect expression. It was the completion of her little way, a way that led, as all true spiritual paths must, to the foot of the cross. Why does God lead his friends into such darkness? Perhaps because darkness is the only place where certain kinds of light can be seen. In the comfortable daylight of our ordinary lives, our faith is often propped up by 1,000 things, by community, by intellectual certainty, by emotional highs, by a sense of our own goodness. The dark night strips all of this away. It leaves us with nothing but God himself. And it is in that nothingness that we discover that he is everything. It is a terrifying and painful process, but it is also a process of liberation. It is the breaking of our idols, the idols of a comfortable God, a predictable God, a God who exists to serve our needs. It is the discovery of the true and living God, the God who is a mystery, a fire, a love that is beyond all our categories. The silence of God in suffering is one of the most difficult mysteries of our faith. We cry out, and there is no answer. We pray, and our words seem to fall into a void. We feel abandoned, alone. But what if the silence is not an absence, but a presence? What if it is an invitation to a deeper kind of communication? A communication that is beyond words. What if God is silent, so that we can finally learn to listen to the beating of our own hearts, to the pain of the world, to the quiet, persistent whisper of a love that is holding us even when we cannot feel it. The saints are those who learn to listen in the silence. They learn to find God in the wound, in the emptiness, in the unanswered question. They learn that faith is not the absence of doubt, but the courage to keep walking in the dark. Let us consider another kind of suffering, the suffering that comes not from within, but from without, the suffering of persecution. The history of the Church is written in the blood of the martyrs. From the arenas of Rome to the concentration camps of the 20th century, Christians have been killed for their faith. But there is another kind of persecution, a slower, more insidious kind. It is the persecution of ridicule, of slander, of being misunderstood and rejected by the very people you are trying to serve. Consider the life of Padre Pio, the 20th century Italian priest who bore the stigmata, the wounds of Christ, in his body for 50 years. He was a man of extraordinary spiritual gifts. He could read souls in the confessional. He could bilocate. He was a channel of immense grace and healing. And yet, his life was a long martyrdom of suspicion and persecution, not from the enemies of the Church, but from within the Church itself. He was investigated, spied upon, and for a time, forbidden to say Mass in public or to hear confessions. His spiritual gifts were dismissed as hysterical or fraudulent. He was isolated, humiliated, and treated like a criminal by his own superiors. The pain of this was far greater than the pain of his physical wounds. It was the pain of being rejected by the mother he loved, the Church. And yet, he never became bitter. He never rebelled. He accepted the persecution with a quiet, heroic obedience. He saw it as a participation in the humiliation of Christ, who was also rejected by his own people. He understood that the path of holiness is often a path of being misunderstood. The world measures success by influence, by popularity, by power. The kingdom of God has a different metric. It measures success by faithfulness, by humility, by the willingness to be small, to be hidden, to be forgotten. Padre Pio's suffering purified his mission. It stripped him of any temptation to pride, to use his gifts for his own glory. It forced him to rely on God alone. It made him a more powerful instrument of God's grace, because it was clear that the power was not his own. His life teaches us that holiness is not about being recognized or applauded by the world. It is about being faithful in the darkness, about loving in the face of rejection, about embracing the cross of being misunderstood. The suffering of the saints is not a problem to be solved. It is a mystery to be entered into. It is a school of love. It teaches us that true faith is not a shield that protects us from the pain of life, but a fire that purifies us within it. It teaches us that the silence of God is not his absence, but his invitation to a deeper communion. It teaches us that the darkness is not a sign of his rejection, but the shadow of his wings. And it teaches us that suffering, when it is united with the suffering of Christ, can become a source of grace for the world. This is the mystery of redemptive suffering. It is the belief that our pain, our struggles, our heartbreaks, when offered up in love, can be joined to the one perfect sacrifice of the cross, and can become a part of the healing of the world. It is a way of not wasting our pain. It is a way of turning our deepest wounds into a source of life for others. This does not make the pain any less real. It does not provide an easy answer to the question of why, but it gives our suffering a meaning, a purpose. It allows us to believe that even in the darkest night, a dawn is being prepared. The lives of the saints are a testament to this hope. They are a great cloud of witnesses who tell us that suffering is never the final word. They show us that the path through the darkness leads to a light that is more brilliant than we can imagine. They show us that the seed must fall into the ground and die if it is to bear fruit. They show us that the pain of the crucifixion is the necessary prelude to the joy of the resurrection. I am Elias, and I have come to believe that the greatest gift God gives to his friends is not comfort, but a share in his own life. And his life is a life of self-emptying, kenotic love, a love that was willing to be broken on a cross. To be a saint is to be invited into that love. It is to be invited to love with a heart that is willing to be broken. It is a terrifying invitation, but it is the only invitation that leads to a joy that the world cannot give and cannot take away. The path is dark, the night is long, but at the end of it is the face of the one who has gone before us, the one who has turned the greatest evil into the greatest good, the one who has transformed the instrument of torture into the sign of victory. And his wounds, which once were a source of agony, are now a source of light, a light that shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not, and will not, ever overcome it. This school of love has many classrooms. Some are prisons of stone, others are beds of sickness, some are deserts of the soul, others are the public squares of ridicule and contempt. The curriculum is always the same, the stripping away of the self. Let us journey to medieval Italy, to a sun-drenched Umbrian hillside. A young man, the son of a wealthy cloth merchant, has renounced everything. He has traded his fine clothes for a beggar's rags, his life of parties and ambition for a life of radical poverty and service to the lepers. His early life as a Christian is filled with joy, with a poetic, almost romantic love for Lady Poverty and all of creation. He preaches to the birds, he tames a wolf, he sees the face of God in the sun and the moon. This is the Francis we know, the gentle, nature-loving saint of the garden statues. But this is not the whole story. The deeper Francis walked into the heart of God, the more his life became a reflection of the passion of Christ. He prayed, with all the fire of his soul, to share in the suffering of his beloved Lord. And his prayer was answered. On the mountain of Laverna, 2 years before his death, he was given a vision of a crucified seraph, a six-winged angel of fire. And when the vision faded, he found that his body had been changed. In his hands, his feet, and his side, he bore the stigmata, the bleeding wounds of the crucified Christ. This was not a metaphor. It was a physical reality. The nails were not just marks. They were described by witnesses as growths of flesh, black and hard, like the heads and points of actual nails. The wound in his side wept blood. For the last 2 years of his life, Francis was a man in constant, agonizing pain. He could barely walk. His eyesight failed. He was in a state of physical collapse, but his joy did not diminish. It became deeper, more profound. He composed his great poem, The Canticle of the Sun, not in a moment of ecstatic health, but in a moment of supreme suffering, when he was blind and in agony. He praised God for brother fire, even as he was being cauterized with a red-hot iron for an eye ailment. He had learned the final secret, that joy is not the absence of pain, but the presence of God within the pain. His suffering was not a punishment. It was a consummation. It was the fulfillment of his life's desire to be completely conformed to Christ, to become a living image of the one he loved. God had made his body a prayer, a testament to the reality of the cross. Francis's story shows us that suffering in the life of a saint is not an obstacle to their mission. It is their mission. It is the very thing that makes their witness powerful. It is what proves that their love is not just a fair-weather sentiment, but a force that can endure the fire. Now, let us come to our own time, to the teeming, chaotic streets of Calcutta. We see a small, stooped figure in a blue and white sari, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her hands gnarled from a lifetime of work. This is Mother Teresa, a woman who became a global icon of compassion, the saint of the gutters. We see the images. She is holding a dying man. She is cleaning the sores of a leper. She is smiling as she cradles an abandoned child. Her words, spoken in simple, direct language, circled the globe. The fruit of silence is prayer. The fruit of prayer is faith. The fruit of faith is love. The fruit of love is service. The fruit of service is peace. She seemed to be a person filled with an unshakable faith, an inexhaustible well of love and joy. But her private letters, published only after her death, revealed a secret that is almost too painful to contemplate. For the last 50 years of her life, from almost the very beginning of her work in the slums, she lived in a state of profound and unremitting spiritual darkness. The God who had called her, the God whose presence she had felt so intensely in her youth, had fallen silent. She wrote to her spiritual director, "There is so much contradiction in my soul, such deep longing for God, so deep that it is painful, a suffering continual, and yet not loved by God, rejected, empty, no faith, no love, no zeal. The saving of souls holds no attraction. Heaven means nothing. Pray for me, that I may not refuse God in this hour." This was not a passing mood. It was a permanent state. For 5 decades, she performed her heroic work of love with no interior consolation whatsoever. She was living the dark night of the soul, not for a few months, in a prison cell like John of the Cross, but for a lifetime. In the full glare of the world's attention, she felt nothing of God's presence. She felt only his absence, his silence, his rejection. And yet, every morning, she got up, she prayed, she went out into the streets, she picked up the dying, she loved without feeling, she loved with the raw, naked power of her will. She chose God every day, in the face of his apparent refusal of her. This is a mystery that staggers the imagination. Why would God allow his most faithful servant to live in such desolation? Her spiritual director gave her an answer that she clung to. He told her that her darkness was a share in the thirst of Jesus on the cross. His thirst for souls, his thirst for love. He told her that her suffering was the dark side of her work, the hidden spiritual price of the immense good she was doing. She was a spiritual lightning rod, drawing the darkness of the world into her own soul, so that she could bring the light of Christ to others. Her smile, which the world saw as a sign of her inner joy, was in fact an act of heroic love, a refusal to let her own interior agony poison her gift to others. She was a living paradox. Outwardly, she was a fountain of love and mercy. Inwardly, she was a desert. Her life is perhaps the most powerful modern testament to the truth that faith is not a feeling. It is a choice. It is the choice to love, the choice to serve, the choice to trust. Even when the heavens are silent and the heart is empty, her darkness did not destroy her. It purified her. It made her love perfect. It stripped her of any possible spiritual pride. She could not say, "I am doing this because I am filled with God's love." She could only say, "I am doing this because He asked me to." The idea of redemptive suffering is central to this mystery. It is the belief that our suffering, when united with Christ's, can have a value, a purpose. The Apostle Paul, a man who was no stranger to suffering, he was beaten, stoned, shipwrecked, and imprisoned, wrote to the Colossians, "Now I rejoice in my sufferings for your sake, and in my flesh I am filling up what is lacking in Christ's afflictions for the sake of his body, that is, the church." This is a shocking statement. What could possibly be lacking in the perfect, all-sufficient sacrifice of Christ? The Church understands this to mean that Christ has chosen to associate us with his work of redemption. He invites us to participate. He allows our own small crosses to become a part of his great cross. Our suffering, our pain, our loneliness, when offered in love, becomes a channel of grace for the whole body of Christ. It is a way of participating in the healing of the world. This does not mean that we should seek out suffering. It means that when suffering finds us, as it finds everyone, we are not to despair. We are to see it as an invitation, an opportunity to love more deeply, to trust more completely, to unite ourselves more fully with the one who has gone before us. The saints are simply those who have accepted this invitation most completely. They are the ones who have allowed their lives to become a continuation of the story of the cross and resurrection. They show us that the Christian life is not about avoiding the cross, but about embracing it. It is about learning to say, with Street Paul, "I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." This is the transformation that suffering works in the soul of a saint. It empties them of themselves so that they can be filled with God. It breaks their hearts open so that their hearts can become large enough to love the whole world. It leads them into the darkness so that they can become a light for others. I am Elias, and I have learned that the silence of God is not a sign of his indifference. It is a sign of his trust in us. He trusts us to love him even when we cannot feel him. He trusts us to be his hands and his heart in the world, even when our own hands are trembling and our own hearts are breaking. The path of the saints is not a path for the faint of heart. It is a path of fire, of darkness, of a love that costs everything. but it is the only path that leads to a joy that is real, a peace that is unshakable, and a life that is eternal. The final word is never the pain, or the darkness, or the silence. The final word is always love, a love that has been tested in the fire and has come out pure gold, a love that has walked through the valley of the shadow of death and has feared no evil, a love that has looked into the face of despair and has chosen to hope. This is the love that moves the sun and the other stars, and it is the love that is waiting for us at the end of our own dark night. What are we, in our age of comfort and distraction, to take from these stories of fire and darkness? It is tempting to place these figures on a pedestal, to admire them as spiritual athletes, a species of human beings so far removed from our own experience that their lives have nothing to say to us. But that would be the greatest mistake. That would be to miss the entire point. The saints are not a different species. They are a promise. They are a signpost. They are a revelation of what every human soul is capable of, and what every human soul is destined for. Their suffering is not a testament to their own superhuman strength. It is a testament to the power of a God who can make saints out of broken, wounded, and terrified people. The difference between a saint and the rest of us is not that they suffer less. It is that they suffer better. They have learned the secret of spiritual alchemy. They have learned how to turn the lead of their pain into the gold of love. This is a lesson that our world desperately needs to learn. We have built a civilization that is a vast, intricate, and ultimately futile attempt to escape from the reality of the cross. We medicate our pain. We distract our minds. We surround ourselves with a wall of noise and entertainment to keep the silence at bay. We have become experts in the art of avoidance. But the pain is still there. The darkness is still there. The silence is still there. And the more we run from it, the more power it has over us. The saints show us a different way. They show us the way of acceptance, of surrender, of walking directly into the heart of the storm, not with the arrogance of our own strength, but with the humble trust of a child. They teach us that the only way out is through. The paradox is this: the more we try to protect ourselves from suffering, the more we suffer. We suffer from the fear of pain. We suffer from the anxiety of loss. We suffer from the emptiness of a life lived on the surface. The saints, by embracing their suffering, by uniting it with the suffering of Christ, found a freedom and a joy that the world can never know. They were the freest people on earth because they had nothing left to lose. They had already died the little deaths of the ego, the death of their own will, the death of their own comfort. And so, the final death, the death of the body, held no terror for them. It was simply the last door to be opened, the final step into the arms of the one they had loved so fiercely in the dark. The silence of God, which we experience as abandonment, is in fact a profound compliment. It is God's way of treating us as adults. He does not spoon-feed us with constant reassurances. He invites us into the maturity of a faith that can stand on its own 2 feet, a faith that can love without needing to be coddled. He is silent, so that we can learn to find His voice, not in the whirlwind of spiritual phenomena, but in the still, small whisper of our own conscience, in the cry of the poor, in the quiet fidelity of a love that endures. The journey of faith is not a journey from darkness to light. It is a journey that learns to find the light within the darkness. It is the discovery that the tomb is not a place of endings, but a place of beginnings. It is the realization that the deepest wounds, when they are touched by the hand of God, can become a source of healing for others. We look at the lives of the saints, and we see a pattern. The desert, the prison, the sickbed, the public square of ridicule. These are the places where God does His best work. These are his workshops. It is where he takes the raw material of our flawed humanity and forges it into something beautiful, something eternal. It is where he teaches us the truth that we are most afraid to learn, that we are not in control, and that our only hope, our only peace, is to surrender to the one who is. I am Elias, and my own journey has taken me to many desolate places, to the ruins of my own certainties, to the silence of my own unanswered prayers. And in those places, I have found that I was not alone. I was walking in the footsteps of a great company of friends, the saints, who had gone before me. They did not offer me easy answers. They did not offer me a way out of the pain. They offered me something far more valuable. They offered me their company. They offered me their witness. They offered me their hope, a hope that is not based on the absence of suffering, but on the presence of a love that is stronger than suffering. A love that can enter into the darkest places of the human heart and bring forth light. A love that can take the broken pieces of our lives and build a cathedral. The final word is not suffering. The final word is not silence. The final word is not death. The name of the one who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is now seated at the right hand of the throne of God. And he invites us to join him there. The path is through the fire, but the destination is home. This is the enduring promise whispered in the silence, the light that flickers in the deepest night. It is a promise that our own small stories of suffering are not meaningless footnotes in a chaotic universe, but are instead woven into the great tapestry of salvation history. Each tear, each moment of quiet endurance, each act of love in the face of pain, becomes a thread in that vast and beautiful design. The saints are the living proof that this is true. They are not distant, plaster figures. They are our family. They are our elder brothers and sisters who have finished the race and now cheer us on from the battlements of heaven. They show us the way. They remind us that we are not alone in our struggles, and they promise us, with the authority of their own scarred and glorified lives, that the dawn is coming, and that the joy that awaits us will be so immense, so overwhelming, that the sufferings of this present time will seem as nothing, as a dream upon waking. The fire is real, but the love is realer still. And it is the love that will have the final, and has always had, the final word.